So I've always been more of a sports car guy, and to me muscle cars have always been cars that you take in a straight line and nothing else. But here I am with the 2017 Ford Mustang. For the first time in 50 years, it now is an independent rear suspension. So is it worth another look? Let's find out. Oh goody. So muscle cars to me have always been about the experience of the car. So whether that is just the way it looks, the way it sounds, and even the way it feels, often a bit crude, but always very masculine feeling. And it's no different with this Mustang. I mean, the steering wheel is kind of this old school dish kind of look, which just never quite feels right in my hand. Which may have something to do with the fact that I don't have big sausage fingers. Interior plastics are they're okay, but on this top spec GT model, for the price you're paying for it, it does feel just a bit cheap. But you also have the sound of that V8, and that for me is very much a defining characteristic of a muscle car. What does the V8 sound like? Sounds good. Well, there's Recaros in this spec'd out performance package Mustang as well. And once again, I'm gonna say that I love these Recaros. They're a little bit milder than the ones that I drove in the Focus ST. There's a little bit less leg bolstering, but it's still very comfortable, and it really gives you a sense that you're ingrained into this car, and it helps you feel in touch with what the car is doing. The shifter is something of a revelation on this car. It just feels really tight and really solid, and it makes this kind of NASCAR style thunk every time you switch into gear. And I like that. It just adds to the experience of the car, just that little bit. The other thing that is kind of unexpected with this Mustang is just how tight things feel. In my mind, muscle cars have traditionally felt heavy and loose, and things are just not well engineered, but the shifter is really tight feeling. It's got a nice short shift to it. And the steering, even though there isn't a ton of feel from it, it feels very accurate, and there's not a lot of slop in the steering wheel. I do feel a bit self-conscious in this car sometimes because it's big and it's loud, and also it's bright yellow, which I thought was kind of a cool color until I lined up with a taxi cab and realized that the yellows were exactly the same. So there are definitely some points about the car that I don't like as much. One of them is something I'm starting to find common with new Fords, and that is having a very touchy brake pedal. I know there's 6-piston Bremos on the front of this car, but still it makes the brakes really difficult to modulate when they're strong right at the top of the pedal. Second thing is the clutch is very vague, so it's okay when you're pushing the car, but when you're around town and you're just trying to feather everything, it makes for kind of jerky progress. I mean, Ford talks a lot about their new suspension and all this anti-dive geometry and how it's supposed to, how their torsional stiffness is supposed to allow them to have, softer springs so you have better ride around town. But I don't know, maybe it's the 19-inch wheels I have on this car, but it just kicks and bucks a little bit more than I think this car should. Now the downside to all of those things is that they kind of put together make the car less comfortable to drive at a cruising pace. And so it just doesn't work as well as a cruiser, which in my mind is something that a muscle car should be good at. You should be able to cruise, you should feel comfortable, and it should be cool. And this car has sacrificed a bit of that day-to-day livability in exchange for track performance. All right, so now some twisties. Let's see what the new suspension changes can tell us. Really this car just grips and grips. I mean, it's a little scary sometimes because you are very aware of that lump of weight ahead of you, but man, it is actually quite awesome. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, you're always aware of the weight, but you can manage it. You just have to kind of tip the car into corners and just be aware and understand that weight is there, but the grip is there. Oh, felt it kind of squirm a little bit. You just feel very connected to the car, and you can really hustle this car and it can flow. I mean, this road isn't super smooth and it still feels good. And then you got that shifter kind of like kicking in to help add to the experience, and the sound of that V8, it's mesmerizing. This car just flows beautifully. You're kind of half expecting the front and rear end to not really be joined up, but it just feels so solid. Like, it just feels together, and that's probably the most shocking thing to me about this new Mustang is I was really not expecting that. I was expecting something that would be kind of loosey-goosey, maybe fun in the corners or fun in the straights, but this car has just blown those expectations just wide open. Yeah, big fan. I'm a big fan of this Mustang. So with a muscle car like this, you mostly expect the engine to dominate the experience. And in this car, it very much does. Like any good 5-liter V8 from Ford, it's got this really nice burble. It's like, and you just feel this surge of torque in like every gear, at almost every rev. It feels so good, you know, and you just want to keep driving it. And that is a huge compliment to what Ford has done with this car. It's really moved it on into the next era. So it's not just focused on straight line speed, but now the car eats up corners as well. And I think the beauty of this is they've modernized the muscle car, and so it doesn't age out and it's still relevant and people still want and lust after it. In many ways, this car feels to me like they haven't really taken away the characteristic traits of a Mustang. It still feels like a muscle car, but they've just refined it a little bit so that it feels just that little bit more well-engineered. I mean, make no mistake, it'll never be a scalpel on the road or on the track, but it feels like a really finely tuned hammer.
So there you have it. This new generation of Mustang is pretty impressive. Yes, I would like it to have a bit more steering feel and better brake modulation, but there are a lot of really good things about this Mustang. The engine revs impressively to 7,000 RPM with oodles of power and torque. The chassis with its new suspension handles surprisingly well in tight twisties. And yet through it all, the car has oodles of that muscle car charm. In short, this Mustang is really, really good.